Vanessa hummed softly as she arranged the colorful game pieces on the board, her son Jaden bouncing excitedly in a seat across from her. The living room was bathed in warm, cozy light, creating a perfect atmosphere for their weekly game night. Outside, the quiet suburban street was shrouded in darkness, with only the occasional street lamp casting a gentle glow. "Okay, buddy," Vanessa said, ruffling Jaden's hair. "Are you ready to lose to your mom again?" Jaden giggled, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "No way. I've been practicing, Mom. You're going down." As they began to play, the familiar rhythm of their game night settled over them. Vanessa cherished these moments with her son, away from the stress of work and the ongoing custody battle with her ex-husband. Here, in their little bubble of happiness, nothing else mattered. Halfway through their second round, a strange noise from the backyard caught Vanessa's attention. She paused, her hand hovering over the game board, and cocked her head to listen. "Mom," Jaden asked, noticing her sudden stillness. "What's wrong?" "Chill," Vanessa whispered, raising a finger to her lips. "Did you hear that?" The noise came again, louder this time, a rustling, followed by a muffled thud. Vanessa's heart began to race as she slowly stood up from the table. "Jaden, sweetie, I need you to stay right here, okay?" she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm just going to check on something." Before she could take a step towards the back door, it burst open with a thunderous crash. Vanessa screamed, instinctively throwing herself in front of Jaden as a man stumbled into their kitchen. He was tall, with disheveled dark hair and wild eyes. Blood stained his shirt, and he was gasping for air as if he'd run a marathon. "Please," the man wheezed, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "You have to help me. They're coming." Vanessa's mind raced, torn between the instinct to protect her son and the desperate plea in the stranger's eyes. "Who's coming?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" "James," he panted. "James Parker. Please, there's no time. They'll kill me if they find me." As if on cue, the sound of screeching tires echoed from the street outside. James's eyes widened in terror. "Mom!" Jaden's small voice quivered behind her. "What's happening?" In that split second, Vanessa made a decision that would change their lives forever. "The basement," she hissed at James, pointing to a door near the kitchen. "Go now, and don't make a sound." James nodded gratefully and stumbled towards the basement door, leaving a trail of blood droplets in his wake. As soon as he disappeared down the stairs, Vanessa turned to Jaden, kneeling to meet his frightened gaze. "Honey, I need you to be very brave right now," she said, cupping his face in her hands. "We're going to play a little game, okay? We need to pretend that nothing unusual is happening. Can you do that for me?" Jaden nodded solemnly, his lower lip trembling slightly. Vanessa's heart ached at the sight, but she forced a reassuring smile. "That's my boy. Now let's go back to our game, and no matter what happens, you stay quiet and let me do the talking." "Okay." They had barely settled back at the game table when a series of loud, aggressive knocks rattled the front door. Vanessa took a deep breath, squeezing Jaden's hand before standing up. "Remember," she whispered, "it's just a game." With shaking hands, Vanessa opened the front door to find two menacing figures looming on her porch. Both men were dressed in dark clothing, their expressions hard and unforgiving. "Good evening, ma'am," the taller of the two said, his voice deceptively polite. "We're looking for a fugitive who may have passed through this area. Have you seen anyone suspicious tonight?" Vanessa forced herself to meet his gaze, praying that her face wouldn't betray her. "No, I'm sorry. It's been a quiet night. Just me and my son playing board games." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, and he glanced past her into the house. "Mind if we take a quick look around? Just to be sure." Every instinct screamed at Vanessa to refuse, but she knew that would only make them more suspicious. With a nod, she stepped aside, allowing the men to enter. As they conducted their brief, tense inspection of the house, Vanessa's eyes kept darting to the basement door, terrified that James might make a sound. She could see Jaden watching wide-eyed from the top of the stairs, and she silently pleaded with him to stay put. After what felt like an eternity, the men seemed satisfied. They thanked her curtly and headed for the door. Vanessa followed, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they must hear it. If you do see anything unusual, ma'am, the shorter man said as they stepped outside, be sure to give us a call. He handed her a card with a number scrawled on it. Vanessa nodded, forcing a smile. Of course. Have a good night, gentlemen. As soon as the door closed behind them, Vanessa sagged against it, her legs weak with relief. She allowed herself only a moment before rushing to the basement, where she found James huddled in a corner, looking slightly more composed. They're gone, she whispered. For now. But you need to tell me what's going on. Right now. James nodded, his expression grim. Those men work for Victor Crane, CEO of Titan Industries. I have digital documents that could bring down his entire corrupt empire. That's why they're after me. Vanessa's mind reeled at the implications. She was about to demand more details when movement outside caught her eye. Peering through the small basement window, she saw a car parked across the street, its occupants clearly visible in the glow of the street lamp. As Vanessa closed the curtains with trembling hands, James whispered, "They're not leaving anytime soon. We're trapped here." Vanessa emerged from the basement, her mind racing with the implications of James's revelation. She found Jaden in the living room, his eyes wide with concern and curiosity. "Mom, what's going on? Who were those men?" Thinking quickly, Vanessa forced a smile. "It's nothing to worry about, sweetie. Just a misunderstanding with some neighbors. Why don't you head up to your room and get ready for bed? I'll be up in a bit to tuck you in." Jaden hesitated, clearly sensing that something was amiss, but nodded and trudged up the stairs. Vanessa waited until she heard his bedroom door close before rushing back to the basement. James was sitting on an old chair, his face pale in the dim light. Vanessa didn't waste any time. "All right, I need answers. Now, what kind of trouble have you brought to my home?" James ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm sorry, I truly am. I never meant to involve innocent people in this mess." He took a deep breath. "I used to work for Titan Industries, one of the largest corporations in the country. I was in their cybersecurity division, and I stumbled upon some irregularities." Vanessa listened intently as James explained how he had discovered evidence of massive fraud, money laundering, and connections to organized crime within the company. He had compiled a dossier of digital documents that could bring down not just Titan Industries, but implicate several high-ranking government officials as well. "That's why they're after me," James concluded. "These documents are worth billions to some very dangerous people." Vanessa moved to the small basement window, carefully peering out. Her blood ran cold as she noticed a dark sedan parked across the street, its occupants barely visible in the shadows. "They're still out there," she whispered. James cursed under his breath and reached for his phone. "I need to contact my ex-colleague, Ingrid. She might be able to help us." As James dialed, Vanessa's mind raced through possible scenarios. How could she keep Jaden safe? Was there any way to get out of this situation without risking their lives? James's frustrated grunt snapped her back to reality. The signal's not going through. They must be jamming it somehow. Vanessa felt a chill run down her spine. These people were professionals, and they had them trapped. "I need to check on Jaden," she said, heading for the stairs. Upstairs, she found Jaden asleep in his bed, his favorite stuffed animal clutched tightly to his chest. Vanessa's heart ached at the sight of her son, blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding them. She gently kissed his forehead before quietly leaving the room. As she descended the stairs, movement outside caught her eye. Shadows flitted across the front yard, barely visible in the moonlight. They were closing in. Back in the basement, James was still trying to get a signal on his phone. "It's no use," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "We're cut off." Vanessa's mind raced. What if we try to make a run for it? Through the backyard. James shook his head grimly. Too risky. They probably got all exits covered. We'd be sitting ducks. They spent the next few minutes discussing possible plans, each one seeming more desperate than the last. The weight of their situation pressed down on them, the feeling of being trapped growing stronger with each passing moment. Suddenly, a thud from upstairs made them both jump. Vanessa's heart leaped into her throat. "Jaden," she gasped, bolting for the stairs. She found her son tossing in his bed, caught in the throes of a nightmare. Gently, she woke him, soothing his fears with soft words and a tight hug. As Jaden drifted back to sleep, Vanessa felt a mix of relief and dread. How long could she keep him safe? Returning to the basement, she found James staring at his phone, his face ashen. "What is it?" she asked, dreading the answer. James turned the screen towards her, revealing a message that made her blood run cold. 2 hours to hand over the documents, or the child pays the price. Vanessa's hands trembled as she reread the threatening message on James's phone. The words burned into her mind. 2 hours to hand over the documents, or her child would pay the price. She looked at James, her eyes wide with fear and determination. "Who's Victor?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Victor's the mastermind behind all this. He's the CEO of the company I was investigating. He's ruthless, Vanessa. We can't underestimate him." They sat in tense silence for a moment, the gravity of their situation weighing heavily on them. Vanessa's mind raced through their limited options. "Should we call the police?" she suggested hesitantly. James shook his head. "Too risky. Victor's got connections everywhere. We don't know who we can trust. Then what about making a run for it?" Vanessa proposed, gesturing towards the back door. "They're watching every exit," James replied grimly. "We'd be caught before we made it to the street." Vanessa stood up abruptly. "I need to check on Jaden," she said, heading for the stairs. James nodded, understanding the mother's concern. As Vanessa climbed the stairs, she could hear James tapping furiously on his phone, likely trying to hack the cell signal to send a coded message to Ingrid. She entered Jaden's room quietly, relieved to find him still asleep. She double-checked the window locks and pulled the curtains tighter before returning downstairs. Back in the living room, she found James hunched over a hastily drawn map of the house. "I've been thinking," he said without looking up, "if we can create a diversion, maybe we can slip out through one of these side windows." Vanessa leaned in, studying the crude sketch. She pointed to a spot near the kitchen. "There's a small cellar door here. It's overgrown with vines, but it might be our best shot." As they discussed potential escape routes, the sound of an approaching car made them both freeze. James quickly ducked behind the couch as Vanessa moved to peek through the curtains. A wave of relief washed over her as she recognized her neighbor's sedan pulling into their driveway. "It's just Mr. Thompson," she whispered to James. "He probably heard the commotion earlier." Taking a deep breath to compose herself, Vanessa opened the front door just as Mr. Thompson was about to knock. The elderly man looked concerned. "Everything all right, Vanessa? Heard some strange noises earlier. Thought I'd check in." Vanessa forced a smile. "Oh, everything's fine, Mr. Thompson. Jaden and I were just playing a rather boisterous game. I'm sorry if we disturbed you." After a few more reassurances, she managed to send the well-meaning neighbor on his way. As she closed the door, she turned to James, an idea forming in her mind. "The neighbors," she said excitedly. "Maybe we can use them somehow. Get a message out." James considered this for a moment. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot. We need to be subtle, though. Any obvious cry for help could put them in danger, too." They moved to Vanessa's home office, where her computer sat idle on the desk. James quickly took control, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he attempted to establish a secure connection. "If I can get through, I might be able to send an SOS to a journalist contact of mine," he explained, his eyes never leaving the screen. Vanessa watched anxiously, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, James let out a small sound of triumph. "Got it. I'm sending part of the documents now. It's not everything, but it's enough to get attention." While James worked on the computer, Vanessa busied herself preparing an emergency bag. She stuffed it with some clothes, water bottles, and a first aid kit. As she zipped up the backpack, a strange sound from above made her pause. "James," she whispered urgently. "Do you hear that?" It sounded like footsteps on the roof. They both looked up, straining their ears. The soft thuds were unmistakable now. Someone was definitely on the roof. "They're trying to find another way in," James said, his voice tight with tension. He turned back to the computer, working faster now. "I need to send as much as I can before they dash." He was cut off by a sharp crack from outside. Vanessa rushed to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. In the dim light, she could make out a figure dropping from the roof to the ground. "James," she hissed, "you need to tell me everything about these documents. What exactly are we risking our lives for? James looked up from the computer, his face grim. It's bigger than you can imagine, Vanessa. Embezzlement, bribery, even murder. Victor's company has been operating like a criminal enterprise for years. These documents prove it all. As the gravity of the situation sank in, a new sound caught their attention. It was coming from the back of the house, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to force open the back door. Vanessa and James exchanged a look of pure dread. They had run out of time. The doorknob of the back door slowly began to turn. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out softly, "James? Vanessa? It's me, Ingrid." The doorknob of the back door slowly turned, and a familiar voice called out, "James? Vanessa? It's me, Ingrid." Vanessa and James exchanged tense glances, their hearts racing. They approached the door cautiously, unsure of what to expect. As they opened the door, they saw Ingrid standing there, her face etched with panic. Before they could react, two burly men emerged from behind her, forcing their way into the house. James instinctively moved to protect the documents, while Vanessa positioned herself near the staircase, ready to defend Jaden if necessary. The intruders, clearly the same men who had been pursuing James earlier, made their demands known immediately. "Hand over the documents," the taller one growled, his hand resting ominously on the gun at his hip. "Or things will get very unpleasant for your friend here." He nodded towards Ingrid, who looked pale and shaken. Vanessa's mind raced, desperately trying to formulate a plan. She needed to buy time, to protect Jaden, and somehow find a way out of this nightmare. "We don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please, just leave us alone." The shorter captor sneered, "Don't play dumb with us, lady. We know Parker's here, and we know about the kid upstairs. You've got 5 minutes to produce those documents, or we start getting creative." James stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Look, I've already sent part of the documents to a journalist. If anything happens to us, the rest will be released automatically. You're too late." The tension in the room escalated as the taller man started to climb the stairs, his intentions clear. Vanessa's heart leaped into her throat, but she forced herself to remain calm. She couldn't let them near Jaden. In the midst of the chaos, Ingrid managed to catch Vanessa's eye and whispered something barely audible. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly as she processed the information. She knew she had to act fast. "Wait!" Vanessa called out, her voice cutting through the tension. I need to check on something in the kitchen. It might be relevant to what you're looking for." The captors exchanged skeptical glances, but allowed her to move towards the kitchen. Once there, Vanessa used her intimate knowledge of the house to create a distraction. She accidentally knocked over a stack of pots and pans, causing a cacophony of clangs and crashes. In the momentary confusion, James seized the opportunity to reach for his hidden device, attempting to send the remaining documents. The noise had barely subsided when a brief, physical confrontation erupted. Ingrid, seizing the moment of distraction, managed to elbow one of the captors in the ribs. The man doubled over, gasping for air, while James grappled with the other. Seeing her chance, Vanessa bolted for the stairs. She raced to Jaden's room, her heart pounding in her ears. Once inside, she quickly locked the door, pulling her confused and frightened son into a protective embrace. "Mom, what's happening?" Jaden whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "It's going to be okay, sweetie," Vanessa assured him, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "We just need to stay quiet for a little while." Downstairs, the sounds of struggle continued. James and Ingrid fought desperately to reach Vanessa and Jaden, while the captors pursued them relentlessly. Furniture crashed, glass shattered, and muffled shouts echoed through the house. Just when it seemed the situation couldn't get any more intense, a new sound cut through the chaos. Police sirens in the distance. For a brief moment, hope surged through Vanessa. Maybe, just maybe, they would make it out of this alive. The sirens grew louder, clearly approaching their location. The captors began to panic, their shouts becoming more frantic. Vanessa could hear James and Ingrid taking advantage of the distraction, their footsteps thundering up the stairs. As the sirens reached a crescendo outside the house, Vanessa dared to believe they might survive this ordeal. But then, cutting through the momentary relief, James's phone vibrated. With trembling hands, he pulled it out and read the message displayed on the screen. As James's face fell, the sirens suddenly stopped, plunging the house into an eerie silence. The fleeting hope that had begun to blossom withered just as quickly. James looked up, his expression a mix of defeat and determination. File transfer failed. Data corrupted, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. James stared at his phone in horror, the error message glaring back at him like a death sentence. The file transfer had failed, and the data was corrupted. Their lifeline, their only bargaining chip, had just slipped through their fingers. Upstairs, Vanessa held Jaden close, trying to soothe her frightened son. The sounds of struggle and raised voices from below were impossible to ignore. "Mom, what's happening?" Jaden whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "It's okay, sweetie. We're just playing a very intense game of hide and seek," Vanessa lied, her voice trembling slightly. She knew she couldn't keep up the charade much longer, but she needed to keep Jaden calm. Downstairs, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The distant wail of sirens had put the thugs on edge, their patience wearing thin. "Time's up," one of them growled, pressing the barrel of his gun against Ingrid's temple. "Give us the documents now, or we start with her." Ingrid, her face pale but determined, spoke up. "Wait, I have a partial copy of the documents. I can give you that, just don't hurt anyone." Vanessa's mind raced as she heard the exchange. She looked around Jaden's room, quickly assembling a makeshift barricade with his dresser and toy chest. "Jaden, I need you to be very brave for me, okay? We're gonna play the quietest game ever. Can you do that?" Jaden nodded solemnly, picking up on the gravity of the situation despite his mother's attempts to shield him. In the attic, James frantically searched through his device, hoping against hope to find a backup of the files. His fingers flew across the screen, each failed attempt sending a jolt of panic through his body. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the house. One of the thugs had begun to break down the door to Jaden's room. Vanessa's heart raced as she pressed herself against the barricade, using all her strength to keep it in place. "James! Vanessa!" Ingrid's voice called out, strained but clear. "I'm creating a distraction. James, run!" The sound of shattering glass followed, and James seized the opportunity to bolt from the attic, narrowly avoiding the grasp of one of the thugs who had been searching for him. In Jaden's room, Vanessa knelt down to her son's level, her hands on his shoulders. "Jaden, listen to me very carefully. If anyone but Mommy comes through that door, I want you to hide in your special place. Remember where that is." Jaden nodded, his lower lip trembling. "The closet with the false back," he whispered. "That's right, my smart boy," Vanessa said, forcing a smile. "And no matter what you hear, stay there until I come get you. Understand?" As Jaden nodded again, the sound of splintering would fill the air. The barricade was about to give way. Downstairs, Ingrid found herself surrounded by the thugs, used as a human shield against any potential police intervention. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "The documents I have, they're incomplete. You need the full set, or they're useless." The lead thug sneered, pressing his gun harder against her back. "Then you better hope your friends cooperate, or you'll be the first to go." In the attic, James had managed to wedge himself into a tight corner, his device clutched to his chest. He could hear the thugs searching the rooms below, their heavy footsteps and angry voices growing closer. Vanessa, still in Jaden's room, felt a glimmer of hope as she noticed a small, almost invisible seam in the wall, a secret passage her son had discovered during one of his explorations. "Jaden," she whispered urgently, "show me your secret path. Quickly." As Jaden revealed the hidden door, Vanessa's mind raced with possibilities. This could be their way out, a means to move through the house undetected. Just then, James's voice echoed from somewhere in the house. "I've got it. I got the backup." For a brief moment, relief washed over Vanessa, but it was short-lived as she heard the unmistakable sound of a scuffle, followed by Ingrid's cry of pain. The thugs had heard James too, and now they had both him and Ingrid. Vanessa knew she and Jaden were the last ones free, their only hope of turning the tables. As she ushered Jaden into the secret passage, praying it would lead them to safety, An eerie silence fell over the house. The sirens that had been wailing in the distance suddenly cut off, leaving them in a tense, suffocating quiet. Vanessa held her breath, straining to hear any sound that might indicate what was happening. In that moment of absolute stillness, a mechanical noise broke the silence, echoing through the walls of the house. At the most silent moment, a mechanical noise echoed through the house. The fire sprinkler system was being activated. The mechanical whirring of the fire sprinkler system echoed through the house, breaking the tense silence. In an instant, chaos erupted as water began to spray from the ceiling, drenching everything and everyone in its path. Vanessa, her maternal instincts kicking into overdrive, grabbed Jaden's hand and pulled him towards the secret passage they had discovered earlier. "Quick, honey," she whispered urgently. "Remember what I told you. Stay quiet and follow me." As they slipped into the hidden corridor, James seized the opportunity created by the sudden confusion. He darted towards the attic, his shoes squeaking on the wet floor. The captor's shouts of frustration and surprise echoed behind him as he climbed the stairs two at a time. Ingrid, still held captive by one of the thugs, saw her chance. As her captor's grip loosened in the chaos, she stomped hard on his foot and twisted away. "The sprinklers!" she shouted, feigning panic. "The whole place is going to flood." The criminals, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected turn of events, began arguing among themselves. "Shut it off," one yelled while another shouted back. "Forget the water. Find the kid and the documents." Vanessa, guiding Jaden through the dark, narrow passage, whispered instructions to her son. "Remember where I told you to hide if things got scary? Go there now and don't come out until I come for you." Jaden nodded bravely, his eyes wide but determined. Meanwhile, James had reached the attic. Water dripped from his soaked clothes as he frantically searched for the hidden device containing the backup files. His fingers trembled as he pried open a loose floorboard, revealing a small, waterproof case. Back on the ground floor, Vanessa emerged from the secret passage, her mind racing. She knew the house better than anyone, and it was time to use that advantage. Slipping into the utility room, she located the main electrical panel. With a deep breath, she flipped the master switch, plunging the entire house into darkness. The sudden blackout amplified the chaos. Shouts of confusion and anger filled the air, punctuated by the sound of people stumbling in the dark. Vanessa used the cover of darkness to move swiftly through the house, gathering makeshift weapons, a heavy flashlight, a fire poker, anything that could give her an edge. In the attic, James cursed under his breath as the lights went out. Using the dim glow of his phone, he worked feverishly to access the backup files. Come on," he muttered, his fingers flying over the device. Ingrid, having broken free from her captor, used her training to move silently through the darkened house. She made her way to Vanessa, whispering urgently, "I managed to send a copy of some documents before they caught me. We're not completely lost." Vanessa nodded, a glimmer of hope rising in her chest. "James is trying to recover the full files. We need to buy him more time." As if on cue, a shout came from upstairs. One of the thugs had discovered the secret passage. "Boss, there's a hidden door here. The kid must be inside." Vanessa's heart raced. She looked at Ingrid, a silent understanding passing between them. It was time to fight back. In his hiding spot, Jaden clutched his tablet, an idea forming in his young mind. With trembling fingers, he accessed the house's smart home system. Following the emergency protocols his mother had taught him, he activated the house alarm. The sudden, piercing wail of the alarm added another layer to the cacophony of chaos. Outside, neighbors' lights began to flick on, curious and concerned faces appearing in windows. James, hearing the alarm, knew their time was running short. With a triumphant grunt, he finally accessed the backup files. "Got it," he exclaimed to himself, immediately starting the process to send the documents to multiple secure locations. Ingrid, using her years of experience, began to strategically move through the house, creating distractions and misleading the intruders. She knocked over furniture, slammed doors, and called out false directions, all while making her way towards James to assist with the crucial file transfer. Vanessa, armed with her improvised weapons, positioned herself near Jaden's hiding spot. She was ready to defend her son at all costs, her eyes sharp in the darkness, every muscle tense and ready for action. As the chaos reached its peak, water spraying, alarms blaring, shouts echoing, the sound of screeching tires cut through it all. Multiple cars were approaching fast, their headlights cutting through the darkness outside. For a moment, everyone in the house froze. The cavalry had arrived. But whose side were they on? Ingrid, having reached James, helped him finish the file transfer. "It's done," James said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. "We've got them." Just then, a crackling voice broke through the chaos. A walkie-talkie, dropped by one of the thugs in the confusion, came to life. Victor's cold, commanding tone filled the air. "Finish it. Now!" Victor's voice crackled through the fallen walkie-talkie, sending chills down everyone's spine. "Finish it. Now!" The command hung in the air, heavy with menace, as the chaos of water from the sprinklers and the wailing sirens created a backdrop of pandemonium. The thugs, hearing their boss's order, transformed instantly. Their desperation morphed into a dangerous aggression, eyes wild with the realization that failure was not an option. Vanessa, her maternal instincts in overdrive, knew she had to act fast to protect Jaden. Utilizing her intimate knowledge of the house, Vanessa slipped into the secret passage she and Jaden had used earlier. The narrow corridor was damp from the sprinklers, but it provided the perfect cover. She moved silently, listening for any sign of the intruders. Suddenly, she heard heavy footsteps above. One of the thugs was dangerously close to discovering their hiding spot. Without hesitation, Vanessa burst from the passage, catching the man off guard. She used the element of surprise to her advantage, landing a solid blow that sent him staggering. The thug, caught between shock and anger, lunged at her, but Vanessa's adrenaline-fueled reflexes were quicker. She ducked, causing him to crash into the wall behind her. Meanwhile, James was in a race against time. Hunched over his device, his fingers flew across the keyboard, desperately trying to recover and resend the corrupted files. The sound of conflict echoed through the house, but he couldn't afford to lose focus. Every second counted. Ingrid, seizing an opportunity amidst the mayhem, confronted the leader of the thugs. Her eyes blazed with defiance as she revealed her trump card. "It's over," she spat. "I've already sent the evidence. You've lost." The leader's face contorted with rage, realizing their mission was compromised. As the adults fought their battles, Jaden proved he was far from helpless. Hidden away in his secure spot, the young boy put his tech-savvy skills to use. Using his tablet, he managed to interfere with the thugs' communication devices, adding to their growing frustration and disorientation. Outside, the police presence grew stronger. Their demands for surrender boomed through megaphones, adding to the cacophony. The thugs, realizing they were cornered, became even more volatile. The sound of breaking glass signaled the start of a fierce shootout between the criminals and law enforcement. Vanessa, having momentarily subdued one attacker, raced towards Jaden's location. Her heart pounded with each step, terrified of what might happen if she didn't reach him in time. As she rounded a corner, she came face to face with another thug. Without breaking stride, she grabbed a nearby vase and smashed it over his head, her maternal fury giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. James's triumphant shout cut through the chaos. Got it! He had successfully recovered the files and was now sending them to multiple recipients, ensuring the truth would come to light no matter what happened next. His victory was short-lived, however, as he heard heavy footsteps approaching his position. Ingrid, drawing on years of experience, took charge of communicating with the police. She shouted out the window, explaining the situation and pleading for careful intervention. Her words seemed to have an effect as the officers outside adjusted their approach, focusing on strategic entry points. The situation reached its boiling point when one of the thugs, desperate and cornered, attempted to use Jaden as a human shield. He had discovered the boy's hiding spot and dragged him out, arm around the child's neck. "Nobody move, or the kid gets it," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Vanessa, seeing her son in danger, felt a surge of primal rage. Without a second thought, she launched herself at the man, catching him off guard. Her sudden attack caused him to loosen his grip on Jaden, who wriggled free and ran to safety. Vanessa and the thug tumbled to the ground, locked in a fierce struggle. James, hearing the commotion, raced to help. He arrived just as Vanessa gained the upper hand, pinning the thug to the ground. James quickly secured the man, his police training kicking in automatically. As he did so, he locked eyes with the leader of the thugs, who was watching the scene unfold with growing despair. "It's over," James said, his voice steady and filled with authority. "I was a cop, and I'm about to become one again. You're finished." The leader's shoulders sagged, the fight finally leaving him as the reality of their situation sank in. The sound of splintering would signal the police's entry into the house. Within moments, the room was flooded with officers, their weapons trained on the subdued criminals. Shouts of "clear" echoed through the house as each room was secured. Amidst the controlled chaos of arrests being made, Vanessa finally reunited with Jaden. She swept him into her arms, holding him tight as tears of relief streamed down her face. The boy, showing remarkable resilience, hugged his mother back fiercely. "We did it, Mom," he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. As the dust began to settle and the criminals were led away in handcuffs, the full scope of what had transpired began to sink in. Vanessa, James, and Ingrid exchanged looks of disbelief and relief, realizing they had just survived an ordeal that would change their lives forever. The house, once a battlefield, now buzzed with the activity of police officers documenting the scene and paramedics checking for injuries. Outside, neighbors gathered, their curious faces illuminated by the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. As Vanessa held Jaden close, still hardly believing they were safe, a detective approached her with a serious expression. "Ma'am," he said, his tone grave, "we need to talk about your ex-husband." As the dust settled on the chaotic night, Vanessa, James, and Ingrid found themselves at the police station, the harsh fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the darkness they had just escaped. They sat in separate rooms, recounting the events of the past few hours to stone-faced detectives who scribbled notes furiously. In a nearby examination room, Jaden sat calmly as paramedics checked him over. His composure surprised everyone, including Vanessa, who watched anxiously through a window. The boy's resilience was a testament to his mother's strength. Detective Bryce, a seasoned officer with kind eyes that belied his tough exterior, approached Vanessa with a grim expression. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to talk about your ex-husband," he said, his voice low and serious. Vanessa's heart raced as she followed him to a private room. "We've uncovered some troubling information," Detective Bryce began. "It appears your ex-husband had significant ties to the corrupt company Mr. Parker was investigating." The revelation hit Vanessa like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, the custody battle she'd been fighting took on a whole new dimension. Meanwhile, James was in the thick of explaining the contents of the leaked documents to a room full of federal agents. His voice was steady as he detailed the intricate web of corruption, money laundering, and corporate espionage. The agents' eyes widened as they began to grasp the magnitude of the scandal. Ingrid, her clothes still damp from the sprinklers, fielded call after call from journalists hungry for the story. She walked a fine line, providing enough information to keep the story alive without compromising the ongoing investigation. Her phone buzzed incessantly, a testament to the growing firestorm. As the implications of the night's events began to sink in, Vanessa realized how profoundly this could affect her custody case. The thought of using this information against her ex-husband filled her with a mix of dread and hope. She caught James' eye across the busy precinct, and he gave her a reassuring nod. Outside the police station, curious neighbors had gathered, their whispers and speculations adding to the surreal atmosphere. News vans began to arrive, their satellite dishes stretching towards the sky like metallic flowers seeking the sun. James, having finished his debrief, approached Vanessa. "I want you to know," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I'm willing to testify on your behalf for the custody case. What your ex-husband did, it's relevant and it matters." Vanessa felt a surge of gratitude, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. The precinct's TV, usually tuned to mindless daytime shows, now blazed with breaking news. Footage of executives being led away in handcuffs played on a loop, their faces a mix of shock and resignation. Vanessa watched, a strange sense of satisfaction warring with her exhaustion. Jaden, finally cleared by the paramedics, rushed to his mother's side. "Mom," he said, his voice small but steady, "are we safe now?" The question, so simple yet so loaded, made Vanessa's heart ache. She pulled him close, marveling at his strength. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "We're safe now." Across the room, Ingrid's phone rang again. This time, her face paled as she recognized the number. It was her former boss, the man who had turned a blind eye to the corruption she and James had uncovered. His pleas for clemency fell on deaf ears as Ingrid coldly informed him that his time was up. As the morning wore on, Vanessa found herself back at her house, now a bizarre mix of crime scene and home. As she collected some personal items, she stumbled upon James' belongings scattered throughout the house. A jacket here, a notebook there. Each item told a story of the man who had crashed into her life and turned it upside down. A knock at the door startled her. A well-dressed woman stood on the porch, her briefcase gleaming in the morning sun. "Mrs. Thompson? I'm Caroline Webster, attorney at law. I'd like to offer my services pro bono for your custody case. What you've been through? Well, let's just say I'd like to help." Vanessa invited her in, a glimmer of hope rising in her chest. As they talked, she could see the pieces of her future slowly falling into place. In the kitchen, James and Ingrid sat at the table, their voices low as they discussed their uncertain futures. The world they had known was gone, replaced by one where they were simultaneously heroes and targets. The path forward was unclear, but they faced it together. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Vanessa found herself drawn to the window. She looked out at the neighborhood, so normal and yet so changed. The events of the night had altered everything, and as she watched the world go on, she knew her life would never be the same. Vanessa's phone rang, breaking the momentary peace. The caller ID made her breath catch in her throat. It was her ex-husband, his voice tense and desperate. "Vanessa, we need to talk. I want to make a deal before this all goes public." In the days following the harrowing night that had changed everything, Vanessa, James, and Ingrid found themselves thrust into a whirlwind of consequences and newfound attention. The case had exploded onto the national stage, transforming their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. Vanessa sat in her lawyer's office, her fingers drumming nervously on the armrest of her chair. The proposal from her ex-husband lay on the desk between them, a peace offering that felt more like a trap. "He's scared," her lawyer said, leaning back in his chair. "This is good for us, Vanessa. We have leverage now." Vanessa nodded, her mind racing. But is it enough? Can we use this to secure full custody? As they discussed strategy, across town, James was facing a barrage of cameras and microphones. The press conference was in full swing, reporters clamoring for details about his role in exposing the scandal. "I did what any citizen should do," James said, his voice steady despite the pressure. "When faced with corruption, we have a duty to act." Meanwhile, Ingrid was navigating her own media storm. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke. Journalists, talk show hosts, even book publishers were all vying for her attention. She walked a tightrope, carefully balancing the need for transparency with the discretion her former position demanded. At school, Jaden found himself the center of attention for the first time in his life. Classmates who had barely noticed him before now crowded around, eager to hear about his brush with danger. "Were you scared?" a wide-eyed girl asked. Jaden paused, considering. "Yeah, but my mom was brave enough for both of us." The cafe was bustling with lunchtime patrons when Vanessa spotted her ex-husband. He sat hunched over a coffee, his once impeccable suit now rumpled and worn. As she approached, she saw the fear in his eyes. "Hello, David," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Vanessa," he began, but she cut him off. "No, you listen. I want to know everything. How deep were you in this mess?" As David spilled his secrets, James was across town at the police station. The chief had called him in, intrigued by the former officer's recent heroics. "We could use men like you, Parker," the chief said. "Have you considered coming back?" James ran his hand through his hair, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it." Back at Vanessa's house, a team of workers was busy installing new security systems. The sound of drills and hammers filled the air, a constant reminder of the night that had changed everything. Ingrid arrived just as the workers were finishing up. She waved a stack of business cards at Vanessa. "You wouldn't believe the offers I'm getting," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Private investigation firms, security consultants. It's madness." As the sun began to set, James returned to the house. He found Vanessa in the kitchen, absently stirring a pot of pasta. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, a weary smile on her face. "Hey yourself, how'd it go at the station?" They talked late into the night, their conversation drifting from the case to more personal matters. There was an undeniable connection between them, forged in the crucible of that terrifying night. The next morning found them all at the courthouse. The custody hearing loomed large, but Vanessa felt a newfound confidence as she walked in, James and Ingrid flanking her supportively. As the hearing progressed, Jaden was called to speak. The judge leaned forward, clearly impressed by the young boy's composure. "And where would you prefer to live, Jaden?" the judge asked gently. Without hesitation, Jaden pointed at Vanessa. "With my mom. She's my hero." Outside the courtroom, news was breaking about the corrupt company's implosion. Stock prices were in free fall, and executives were jumping ship left and right. Amidst the chaos, Vanessa received an unexpected call. A publisher, excited by the media coverage, wanted her to write a book about her experience. "Your story is incredible," the publisher gushed. "People need to hear it in your own words." That evening, as James and Ingrid were being honored at a small ceremony for their bravery, Vanessa sat with Jaden, explaining the changes that were coming. "So, we're gonna be okay?" Jaden asked, his eyes searching his mother's face. Vanessa pulled him close. "We're gonna be more than okay, sweetheart. We're gonna be amazing." As the week drew to a close, Vanessa's family gathered for a celebratory dinner. The table was laden with food, laughter filling the air for the first time in what felt like ages. Vanessa stood, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Everyone clinked glasses, the sound ringing out like a promise of better days to come. As they all toasted to the future, Jaden piped up innocently, "Mom, can we have another game night like that one?" Months had passed since that fateful night, and the world had shifted for Vanessa, James, and Ingrid. The autumn sun streamed through the windows of Vanessa's home office as she sat at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard. With a deep breath and a satisfied smile, she typed the final words of her book. The manuscript that had consumed her thoughts for months was finally complete, a testament to the incredible journey that had changed their lives forever. As Vanessa leaned back in her chair, savoring the moment, she heard the front door open. James's familiar footsteps echoed through the house, followed by Jaden's excited chatter. The sound of their voices brought a warmth to her heart that she was still getting used to. "We're home," James called out, his voice carrying a lightness that had been absent when they first met. Vanessa emerged from her office to find him hanging up his police jacket. He had returned to the force, driven by a renewed sense of purpose after their ordeal. "Perfect timing," Vanessa said, greeting them both with a hug. "Dinner's almost ready, and Ingrid should be here any minute." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Jaden raced to answer it, revealing Ingrid standing on the porch with a bottle of wine and a thick folder tucked under her arm. "I come bearing gifts and news," Ingrid announced as she stepped inside. Her eyes sparkled with the excitement of someone who had found their true calling. Since opening her own investigation agency, Ingrid had thrown herself into her work with passionate dedication. They gathered around the dining table, the aroma of Vanessa's cooking filling the air. As they settled in, Ingrid couldn't contain her news any longer. "The final verdict came in today," she said, her voice brimming with satisfaction. "The last of the executives have been sentenced. It's over." A collective sigh of relief passed through the room. The corruption that had nearly cost them everything had been fully exposed and justice had been served. That calls for a toast, James said, raising his glass. To closure and new beginnings. As they clinked glasses, Jaden tugged at Vanessa's sleeve. Mom, can I show everyone my school project now? With a nod from Vanessa, Jaden dashed to his room, returning moments later with a colorful poster board. It's about everyday heroes, he explained proudly, pointing to the photos and drawings that cover the board. Among the images of firefighters and doctors were pictures of Vanessa, James, and Ingrid. Oh, sweetie, Vanessa murmured, her eyes misting over as she pulled her son into a tight hug. The moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of Vanessa's phone. She excused herself to answer it, returning a few minutes later with a wide grin. That was my editor, she announced. The book launch is set for next month. They're expecting it to be a bestseller. Congratulations filled the room, and James pulled Vanessa close, planting a kiss on her forehead. I never doubted it for a second, he said softly. As the evening wore on, Vanessa and James found themselves on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Their hands intertwined naturally, a gesture that had become comfortingly familiar over the past months. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Vanessa asked, leaning her head on James's shoulder. He chuckled softly. Not in my wildest dreams, but I wouldn't change a thing. Their moment of peace was interrupted by a car pulling into the driveway. A woman with a notepad and camera emerged, waving enthusiastically. Miss Thompson? Mr. Parker? I'm from the local Gazette. We were hoping to do a follow-up story on how your lives have changed since that night. Vanessa and James exchanged a glance, then called for Jaden and Ingrid. Together, they sat down with the reporter, sharing the positive changes that had come from their harrowing experience. As the interview wound down, Ingrid's phone buzzed. She excused herself to take the call, returning with an excited glint in her eye. New case, she explained. A corporate whistleblower needs protection. Looks like it could be interesting. Just be careful, Vanessa cautioned, remembering all too well how their own whistleblowing adventure had unfolded. The next morning, Vanessa found herself in her lawyer's office, finalizing the last details of her custody agreement. With her ex-husband's involvement in the corrupt company exposed, gaining full custody of Jaden had been surprisingly straightforward. I think that covers everything, her lawyer said, closing the file with a satisfying thud. Congratulations, Vanessa. You've come a long way. Back at home, Vanessa found James and Jaden in the backyard. James was patiently demonstrating some basic self-defense moves, which Jaden mimicked with enthusiastic, if slightly uncoordinated, efforts. Mom, Jaden called out when he spotted her. Dad's teaching me how to be tough like you. Vanessa's heart swelled at hearing Jaden refer to James as Dad. It had started happening naturally over the past few weeks, and each time it filled her with a sense of rightness. That evening, as they all gathered in the living room, Vanessa pulled out an old, slightly battered box from the closet. I found this earlier, she said, setting the board game on the coffee table. It was the same game she and Jaden had been playing the night their lives changed forever. For a moment, they all stared at the box, memories of that terrifying night flooding back. Then slowly, Jaden reached out and opened it. Can we play? He asked, his voice small but hopeful. Vanessa looked at James and Ingrid, seeing her own mix of emotions reflected in their eyes. Then, with a deep breath, she nodded. Yes, let's play. As they set up the game, laughter began to fill the room. The tension of the memory eased, replaced by the joy of the present moment and the bright future ahead of them. Vanessa was just about to roll the dice when the phone rang. She excused herself to answer it, listening intently for a few moments before returning to the group. Who was that? James asked, noting the mix of excitement and trepidation on Vanessa's face. She took a deep breath before answering. Hello, Mr. Bernard. Yes, I'd love to write your story too.